The burning wind of Mesopotamia moves through the royal gardens of Kala. Today, that land lies within modern Iraq, but under the same unforgiving sun that once illuminated exotic flowers and carved stone statues. Something far darker stood in those gardens long ago. What glinted in the heat was not beauty. It was rust. Thick iron chains, cracked and corroded, stretched between cold stone pillars. Bound to them stood figures that had once been called human. For 11 continuous hours, they have remained upright. They are not permitted to sit. They are not permitted to kneel. Their bare feet, split and bleeding, press against the floor that offers no mercy. On their faces, the Empire has engraved something permanent. Hooks of oxidized iron pierced their cheeks from one side to the other. They were driven in weeks earlier with the same routine precision a craftsman might use when fastening wood. There was no rage in the motion, no spectacle, only repetition. Now, each breath shifts the iron slightly inside living flesh. Each swallow drags cold metal across torn tissue. Even a quickened heartbeat caused by fear makes the hooks tremble beneath the skin. Their heads have been shaved clean, every trace of personal adornment removed. Across their foreheads lies a dark mark embedded deeply into the skin. It is not simple ink. The pigment was thickened deliberately with the crushed ashes of their own fathers, brothers, and husbandsmen who had died defending their cities. When these women attempt to speak, no clear words emerge. The Assyrian surgeons did not cut their throats. They removed the upper lip with careful calculation. The intention was not silence. It was distortion. Every sound they produce for the rest of their lives becomes a grotesque gurgling noise that draws dry laughter from imperial guards. The Empire did not want them mute. It wanted them permanently disfigured, so that even their voices testify to their exclusion from humanity. They are not hidden in underground cells. They are positioned deliberately in open spaces. Princesses, queens, daughters of ancient royal lines, displayed before ambassadors, merchants, and citizens who pass through the corridors of power. The state transformed them into living warnings that even their own mothers might not recognize. And the deepest tragedy is not the agony they endure at this moment. It is that their captors do not intend to let them die. They must remain alive, breathing, suffering. For 20 or 30 years, if possible. Killing a body in battle takes seconds. A sword, a spear, and it ends. But sustaining a person in a condition designed solely to erase identities, that requires planning. It requires administration. It requires what can only be described as a calculated architecture of pain. This was the governing philosophy of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a civilization where death was not the ultimate punishment. Death was mercy withheld. For more than 300 years, from 911 to 609 BCE, Assyria ruled Mesopotamia with relentless force. Its kings recorded their cruelty openly in stone. Ashurbanipal II boasted of flaying generals alive. Prisoners were impaled outside conquered cities. Towers were constructed from the skulls of enemies. Those acts were public and immediate, reserved largely for men captured in war. For royal women, however, the empire employed something more intricate and devastating. The fate of these women was not a byproduct of war. It was a central pillar of imperial strategy. It was a message, broadcast not just to the conquered, but to the entire known world. This is the story of how an empire perfected the art of psychological warfare, turning human beings into living monuments of its own terror. The Assyrian war machine was arguably the most effective of its time. Its military innovations, from siege engines to organized cavalry, allowed it to dominate the Near East. But its true power lay not just in conquest, but in control. Once a city fell, the real work began. The empire needed to ensure that no rebellion would ever rise again. And that's where the systematic cruelty became a tool of state. The public displays of torture were not random acts of sadism. They were meticulously documented and publicized. Royal scribes carved reliefs, showing these scenes in graphic detail on the walls of palaces in Nimrod, Nineveh, and Dor-Shaharkin. These weren't hidden away. They lined the very halls where foreign dignitaries would wait for an audience with the king. Imagine being an ambassador from a smaller kingdom, waiting to negotiate a treaty. All around you, You see stone carvings of your peers from other nations being impaled, flayed, and dismembered. The message was clear. This is the price of defiance. Compliance is your only option for survival. The kings themselves took pride in their brutality, viewing it as a sign of divine favor and righteous power. The god Ashur, the chief deity of the Assyrian pantheon, was a war god. Victorious campaigns were seen as the execution of his divine will. In his annals, King Ashurbanipal II proclaims, "I built a pillar over against his city gate, and I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. I cut off the limbs of the officers, the royal officers who had rebelled." This was not a private diary entry. This was an official public record, a declaration of his governing philosophy. Cruelty was policy. Terror was a legitimate instrument of governance. It was designed to break the spirit of entire populations, to sever their connection to their leaders, their history, and their gods. The logic was simple. A people who have witnessed such horrors will be too terrified to ever dream of freedom again. But why the specific, prolonged torment for royal women? It served a deeper, more insidious purpose. In the ancient world, royal women were symbols of sovereignty, continuity, and divine legitimacy. The queen, or princess, embodied the health and prosperity of the nation. By capturing and disfiguring them in such a public and permanent way, the Assyrians were not just punishing individuals, they were attacking the very identity of the conquered people. They were demonstrating that the gods of the vanquished were powerless, their royal lines broken, and their future extinguished. The removal of the upper lip, for instance, wasn't just about making their speech unintelligible. It was a symbolic castration of their culture's voice. The tattooed ashes on their foreheads were a constant, physical reminder that their lineage had been turned to dust and incorporated into their own humiliation. They were forced to carry the death of their people on their own body. This created a state of living death, a psychological prison from which there was no escape. Unlike the men who were killed quickly on the battlefield or in public executions, these women were preserved. Their survival was a testament to Assyria's absolute power, the power not just to take life, but to twist it into a permanent state of suffering. They became living ghosts, walking through the Assyrian capital as a perpetual warning. Every citizen, every visiting merchant, every foreign diplomat would see them and understand the full extent of Assyrian dominance. It was a form of propaganda, far more powerful than any written decree. The horror was not in a story they were told. It was in the haunted eyes of the woman they passed in the courtyard. This psychological dimension is what set Assyrian cruelty apart. They understood that memory and identity were battlegrounds just as important as any physical territory. To truly conquer a people, you had to conquer their past and annihilate their future. The Assyrian system was so effective that it held a vast, multicultural empire together for centuries, through sheer terror. But this reliance on brutality was also its greatest weakness. An empire built on fear has no true loyalty. Its subjects obey not out of respect, but out of a desperate desire to avoid pain. When the core of the empire began to weaken from internal strife and overextension, its enemies, who had nursed centuries of hatred, saw their chance. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, peoples who had suffered immensely under Assyrian rule, besieged and utterly destroyed the capital city of Nineveh. The destruction was apocalyptic. The hatred for Assyria was so profound that the victors showed no mercy. They burned the city to the ground so completely that its location was lost to history for over 2 millennia. The Assyrian Empire, the very symbol of terror and permanence, vanished from the world. When archaeologists rediscovered the ruins of the Assyrian palaces in the 19th century, they unearthed the stone reliefs that had been buried for thousands of years. The world was shocked by the graphic depictions of cruelty. But these carvings tell only part of the story. They show us the victor's boasts, but they cannot fully convey the lived experience of the victims. They cannot capture the sound of iron scraping against bone, the relentless Mesopotamian sun on a shaved head, or the silendo, unending scream trapped behind a mutilated mouth. The story of the Assyrian Empire is a dark reminder that civilization and savagery can be two sides of the same coin. It shows how systems of power can codify cruelty into law and elevate terror to an art form. It's a stark lesson from the depths of history about the devastating, long-term cost of ruling by fear and the powerful, burning desire for vengeance it inevitably creates. Thank you for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past compelling, Please like this video and subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of history. To understand what happened next, we have to step inside the worldview of ancient Mesopotamia. Today, a name is just an administrative label, something printed on a plastic card or stored in a data. But in the ancient Near East, a name was infinitely more. It was the audible form of a soul. It was how the gods recognized you, judged you, and remembered you. To remove a name wasn't just a bureaucratic correction. It was existential erasure. It was the closest thing to total annihilation a culture could imagine. So, when the Assyrians captured noble women from rival kingdoms, their first target wasn't the body. It was the name. Clay tablets discovered in the royal archives of Mari tell the story of a princess from Elam, taken by King Tiglath-Pileser III. She hadn't led armies or plotted rebellion. Her only crime was that her city had resisted Assyrian tribute. That was enough. Her destruction began not with bloodshed, but quietly in the record rooms. Scribes searched tablets, monuments, and treaties anywhere. Her name was written. With small bronze chisels, they scraped away every single reference. In official documents, she was reclassified under cold designations like the one who must not be named. Her identity was reduced to a number in a military inventory. With that quiet administrative act, her existence before the divine was extinguished. Though her lungs still filled with desert air, in the spiritual order, she was already gone. Years later, in 647 BCE, when Assyria destroyed the city of Susa, among the captives were 3 sisters of the Elamite king. They were of royal blood, celebrated across the entire region. But the Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, didn't order their execution. Instead, he ordered something far more terrifying, something the inscriptions called a transformation of the divine form. This wasn't chaotic violence. It was a cold, controlled process. First, their hair was shaved every 3 days. In Mesopotamian belief, a woman's hair was a symbol of divine femininity. Shaving it continuously locked them in a state outside of all social and cosmic categories, neither fully woman nor even fully human. Then, the tattooing began. Black pigment, thickened with the ashes of their own slain relatives, was injected beneath their skin. Symbols of eternal servitude were etched onto their foreheads. Every time they glimpsed their reflection in water, they saw the physical remains of their own families embedded in their flesh. Finally, palace smiths forged iron hooks, identical to those used to hang butchered animals. Physicians supervised as these hooks were inserted into their bodies, carefully avoiding major arteries. The objective was permanence, not fatality. The metal became a part of them. What makes this so uniquely horrifying is the bureaucratic precision behind it. These women were fed nutrient-rich diets. Their wounds were cleaned with primitive but effective ointments to prevent infection. Ashurbanipal himself requested medical reports. He needed confirmation that his captives remained alive. This wasn't uncontrolled rage. This was governance. There was another punishment, one that scholars have termed total social annihilation. This was reserved for royal women whose families had dared to defy Assyria. The process began in public, in Nineveh's central square, under the shadow of the great temple of Ishtar. Crowds gathered, but no whips were raised, no swords were drawn. Instead, the women's bodies were coated with a mixture of honey, cedar resin, and animal fat. This sticky paste attracted insects, tormenting them while preserving the skin underneath. For 3 days, they stood beneath the brutal desert sun as scribes read aloud every single one of their former titles, and then, one by one, erased them from the official clay records. After this ritual humiliation, the reversal of their status began. These former queens and princesses were forced to clean public latrines. They tanned hides in vats filled with urine. They dragged carts of refuse through the same streets that once emptied in reverence when they passed. They were made to wear filthy rags, intentionally dyed with a cheap, mocking purple, the color of royalty, twisted into a symbol of their degradation. Children threw stones at them. Villagers shut their doors. Even their own surviving relatives refused contact, terrified of divine contamination or attracting the emperor's wrath. This degradation continued for nearly 3 years. If they fell ill, physicians would intervene not out of mercy, but to ensure the lesson endured. Finally, one day, the gates of Nineveh opened, a guard placed a small sack of grain at their feet and declared them free. But what was freedom? It was exile into a world that completely rejected them. Their lips had been mutilated, ensuring their voices would frighten rather than persuade. Villages barred their entry. Even their own blood relatives looked away. They were alive, yet erased from memory, family, and society. They were ghosts, forced to walk the earth. A permanent, living warning of the price of defying the Assyrian Empire. This was not just punishment. It was the complete and systematic destruction of a human being, leaving only a shell to carry the message. Thank you for watching. If you found this glimpse into the past as fascinating as I did, consider subscribing for more stories from the depths of history. Imagine a world where your very existence is denied, not just your rights, but the fact that you were ever born. This isn't a dystopian novel. It was the chilling reality for countless women in the ancient Assyrian Empire. When the empire fell, a system was put in place to erase them from history, to turn them into living ghosts. Some were exiled, left to perish along harsh trade routes. Others found refuge in the shadows, forming secret communities in the ruins of fallen cities. They were settlements of women without names, bound by a shared, enforced silence. Why such a cruelly elaborate system of erasure? It was a calculated political strategy. The architects of this new order understood something profound about power. A dead queen can become a martyr, her story a rallying cry for rebellion. But a woman stripped of her identity, her name, her past a living ruin serves as a constant, terrifying warning. Executing rebels can unite their followers, forging them into a stronger force. But social annihilation, this complete and total erasure of a person's place in the world, is paralyzing. It doesn't just kill the body. It aims to kill the soul, the memory, the very idea of resistance. The goal was to create a society where these women were invisible, their voices unheard, their stories untold. They were meant to fade into the background, forgotten by the world, and eventually be themselves. They lived in a state of non-existence, a silent testament to the empire's power to not just conquer, but to completely unmake. But history, as we'll see, has a funny way of holding on to secrets, of preserving the voices that were meant to be silenced forever. In the year 612 BCE, the great city of Nineveh, the heart of the mighty Assyrian Empire, fell. Its legendary palaces, adorned with reliefs of kings and conquests, were consumed by fire. Its monumental statues, symbols of divine power, were shattered and toppled. An empire that had dominated the known world for centuries crumbled into dust in memory. The victors celebrated, believing they had not only defeated Assyria but had also extinguished its legacy. Fast forward centuries. Archaeologists are carefully sifting through the layers of destruction at Nineveh. Amidst the rubble and debris of a once great civilization, they make a discovery that is small in size, but monumental in significance. Hidden behind loose bricks in a ruined wall, they find a collection of small clay tablets. These are not the grand, official records of the empire. They are not written in the imperial Akkadian script, the language of kings and scribes. Instead, they are inscribed in Aramaic, the common tongue, the language of the everyday people. The writing is uneven, hurried, almost frantic. The marks pressed into the clay are not the work of a professional scribe, but of someone unaccustomed to writing, someone whose hand likely trembled as they worked. It becomes clear these tablets were created in secret, hidden away from prying eyes. They were the forbidden records of the very women the new regime had declared non-existent. They were a whisper from the void, a message from the ghosts of Nineveh. Imagine the scene. In the dead of night, under the cloak of darkness, a woman risks everything. Someone steals a stylus, a simple pointed tool. Someone else finds a piece of wet clay, the most basic of materials. In a hidden corner of the ruins, they now call home, they begin to write. Each stroke of the stylus into the soft clay is an act of defiance. If they were discovered, the punishment would be unimaginable torture, and a death that would ensure they were truly forgotten. But the fear of punishment was outweighed by a more powerful, more fundamental human need. The need to leave a trace, to prove that they had existed. The need to shout into the void of history, I was here, I lived, I mattered. They weren't writing epic poems or royal decrees. They were simply recording their presence, their survival. These small, fragile clay tablets became their testament, their rebellion. Modern historians now look at these fragmented pieces of clay with a sense of awe. They are considered among the earliest documented acts of female resistance in history. But this was a different kind of rebellion. It wasn't a rebellion fought with swords and shields, not a battle for territory or political power. It was a rebellion of memory. It was a war waged against oblivion, fought with a stolen stylus and a lump of clay. In their silent world, these women redefined their suffering. The scars that marked their bodies were no longer symbols of shame or victimhood. They renamed them as marks of endurance. The chains, whether literal or metaphorical, that bound them were not just instruments of oppression. They reclaimed them as proof of their incredible survival. They had been stripped of everything, yet they found a way to reforge their identity from the ashes of their old lives. Their secret writings contained no grand calls for vengeance. They did not appeal to the gods for retribution against their oppressors. Their message was far simpler and, in many ways, far more profound. They simply recorded that they had lived in a world that was trying to erase them. The simple act of stating we exist was the ultimate act of defiance. They weren't trying to rebuild an empire. They were trying to preserve a soul. It was a quiet revolution, a testament to the fact that even when stripped of everything, the human spirit's desire to be remembered cannot be extinguished. Empires have always been obsessed with permanence. They build monuments of stone and granite, believing these structures will ensure their legacy lasts for eternity. They create vast, intricate bureaucracies, trusting that their systems and records will impose their order on the world forever. And most of all, they trust in the power of fear to maintain control, to silence dissent, and to enforce their will. The Assyrians were masters of this. Their palaces, their laws, their armies all were designed to project an image of unshakable, eternal power. But there is a profound irony in their story. The grand stone monuments of Nineveh shattered, the complex bureaucracy dissolved into chaos. The fear they wielded eventually failed to protect them. And what survived? Not the towering statues or the imperial decrees. What survived was small, unassuming tablets of clay hidden in the cracks of the ruins. Clay, a material so humble and fragile, proved to be more resilient than the empire's stone. It survived the fires that consumed the palaces. It survived the centuries of neglect and burial. It held its secrets, waiting for the right moment to speak again. And something else survived, something even more powerful and intangible than clay. Memory. Memory is not stored in stone or paper alone. It lives in stories, in whispers, in the silent acts of defiance passed from one person to another. The empire sought to control the official record, to write the one and only version of history. But they couldn't control the secret histories, the memories held in the hearts of those they tried to erase. Right now, in this very moment, something remarkable is happening. As you listen to this story, the plan that was so carefully designed to erase these women fails once more. The silence that was meant to be their final legacy is broken. Their names, which were scraped from official records and forbidden to be spoken, echo again in our modern world. They are remembered. And why? Not because the empire or its successors allowed it. Not because of some official pardon or historical revision. They are remembered because someone, somewhere, in the darkness of a ruined city, refused to let silence have the final word. One person, and then another, made a choice. They chose memory over oblivion. They chose to risk everything for the chance that someday, someone would find their message. Today, we are the ones who found it. By listening, by remembering, by sharing their story, we become a part of their rebellion. We ensured that their act of courage was not in vain. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more hidden histories. Every story we share is a voice we refuse to let fade away.